Sheng from Plan A magazine. Welcome
Hey,
in. Hello, sir. How are you?
how's it going, fellas? Glad
Good,
to hear
good.
you guys finally got to get your drink on last night. Karthik, you don't look messed up, man. You look fine. You look like you're
You
weathering
should
it
have
just
seen
fine.
me yesterday.
I see. Okay.
Now, we've actually, been able to kind of have a few talks, but we wanted to bring you on today, just kind of be able to speak about your project that you have with some of the fellow Asian diaspora, but then also kind of get into some of the cultural issues, conflicts that are kind of going on in the United States. So, if you would please, if you could just describe what is Plan A.
Yeah, I'd say Plan A. We call it a magazine. It's really sort of like a podcast plus a Patreon and a website, where the primary goal of it, I wouldn't say we ever really had a mission, but the primary goal of it was just to stoke more Asian people, particularly in America, but all throughout like Western diaspora, to sort of speak more openly and frankly, especially these days where politics is sort of a lot less bland and a lot more full contact than it used to be. And I am convinced that, like me, a lot of other Asian people in the Western diaspora have very strong opinions on stuff, but often are maybe a little bit afraid to express it or don't know how to merge into the conversation. And so I think if I was to state a goal, I don't think we ever said this formally, but if I was to sort of summarize the goal of it, it would be that.
And I guess too is like, yeah, like how long have you guys been running, and also I think, like, how would you judge your success thus far by that goal of being a voice to Asian people who have largely kind of been sectioned off, and like I think too is like this has to do with like some of the model minority myth of like, well, you're just supposed to be quiet and go to work and then that's it because you're the model minority, not like these loud African Americans over here, So yeah, if you kind of can go into that of like a little
Sure.
bit too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, here's the thing: is I think we've been successful by our own standards, which is like, we've got enough trash that none of us, the original like 7 people who started this, all of them are still on board after 5 years, and we're still having fun doing it. And that wouldn't happen unless I think, and you guys might feel this too, is like, you just need enough to make it feel worth your while in terms of, feed like people responding to the message. And I think for us, it's always been more about the depth and quality of engagement than sort of like total numbers, right? So we've never gone after like YouTube numbers or anything like that. But we're really looking, like, I think Patreon kind of more is really more about depth of engagement than scope, right?
Yeah.
So I think we've been successful on that front. And but in terms of like, let's take the model minority myth. I don't think, I think we reject. I think in a large way we've moved past the notion of model minority. I think that just like the whole notion of Asian Americans as a spoiler race has gone. I mean, there's like 20 plus million Asians in America alone. And so I think the old model for one race being the spoiler for, let's say, the racial grievance of another has been replaced, in my view, and I've confirmed this with, I think, other people who do similar work as us, but who are not Asian, like Black friends who look at the same thing. And we found that what has happened is, instead of using one race against another, which I think is kind of an older model, we now have this sort of intra-racial, almost a class divide, where you have like an exceptional class within the group that is used to represent and speak for the entirety of the race. And this is a very small group of people that become, and I think this has happened, say, with Black Americans, that there is sort of an exceptional media class that goes on CNN or that holds high office or whatever. And from the perspective of the rest of America, this class of Black American is representative and speaks on behalf of, with permission, for all of Black America. And that model, I think, is happening with Asians too, but in a more niche way. But I think we've confirmed, or at least have validated, that model is happening.
And like I think you like make great parallels, and Pascal Robert from Black Agenda Report in this revolution, describes them as like the black chattering class,
Yes.
and like Van Jones or Joanne Reed, we could go on and on and on.
The current press secretary is also
yes, Haitian, the Haitian sensation, Karine Jean-Pierre. But yes, and like these people are chosen to speak on behalf, and that's the thing too, is I think with like the Stop Asian Hate movement or like issue, and that was raised, you're gonna get, especially like from the elite class, is like this type of rush to representation, and that's and in some cases too, like Orono is one of the representatives. I'm blanking on on the senator's name, who was
Tammy Duckworth, maybe.
Duckworth, yes.
Yeah, she was.
Which she's another one where like they kind of trot her out anytime there's something to be spoken on, and then they're like, hey, we speak for all Asians in the United States. This is kind of how things are going, and then I guess so going off of that, how are you able to cut through those narratives with not only just like obviously like the Asian community, because like I'm not going to assume you're only writing and doing podcasts for the Asian community, but yeah, how do you cut through that narrative to say like, hey, these people are going to sell you down the river, not only to the Asian community, but then like also more widespread as to like why people, non-Asians who may be wanting to help in certain cases, whether it has to do with like breaking certain cultural myths, how do you cut through that to actually not just end up supporting these representations that don't actually represent us?
That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it before. I think the way I'd answer that is that we tend not to speak too directly about politics. I mean, people have different politics, right? They have different views about foreign policy. They have different views about domestic policy. Like, it's complicated. And so I think for us, we tend to avoid that to an extent, though I think we have that in mind, right? But I think that we probably approach it a little bit more from the perspective of like, I know this is gonna, I'm trying to avoid certain buzzwords that have been misused, like lived experiences, but I do think like we try to connect more on just sort of like everyday individual experiences that we go through, which can either be frustrating or under celebrated, under recognized, or just something that like connects our experiences to each other to say, oh yeah, there is like this there is this thing that you go through in American life as an Asian person, which is not necessarily bad, but it is unique. And so I think we often just talk about sort of like everyday life kind of things, and that way I think we start building a bit of like credibility in terms of saying like, yeah, we experience the same things you experience, and let's, it's funny, like a lot of this stuff is stuff like people don't really like talking about, like the strange dynamics of dating as an Asian person in America. Not a particularly politically charged subject, but you would be surprised how quick the pipeline is from addressing things like that into larger investigations and interrogations of like how America works and how how race works in America, things like that.
One place where go ahead. One place where I kind of saw see a way in which like the chattering class especially is in more, as much as like they typify a particular type of like Asian American archetype, like a person who has a certain kind of set of qualities. It's like always the nerdier kind of a person, always a a kind of a person who has to overcompensate with humor, which is something that I perceive with Indian Americans especially. Like, you have to be funny for some reason, and like if you're not, you kind of don't even have a seat at the table in that sense. And like especially among women, you have to be overtly sexualized and like kind of more of a more of a loudmouth in a kind of way, not like, and the guys are introverted. That's something that I've noticed. But like, I mean, as much as like you would, I'd like for you to kind of clarify. Of course, like there's all kinds of people. So that's like the easy answer out of it. But like, as much as to clarify what the point of doing something like that is, another thing that I find the chattering class, at least in the Asian side, to Typify is an approach to that. And this is like, I can say it's true for India as well, like approach to diaspora as the kind of savior for them. Like it's in a kind of way, like leaving their respective home countries was the way by which they achieved a certain level of like emancipation or liberation or whatever. And like you look at those countries, like whether it's China, whether it's Korea, whether it's India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or whatever, they're all like the third world, like you kind of got out of it, and therefore you kind of deserve like a kind of liberty that you enjoy here. So I think like one of the ways in which I've seen Plan A, at least like I can't claim to know all the 7, but at least like you and Eliza, or I think
Eliza Romero.
Some tweets I've seen here and there, and like podcast episodes where you seem to have an approach towards the home country, so to say, that is not necessarily just a negative, oh, I'm glad I made it out of there kind of way. And like before we get into like the actual positives of whether it's China or like North Korea or whatever, like would you like to talk to this whole like feeling of like it's like America saved you, and how you fundamentally should be in disagreement with that as a concept if you kind of want to do justice to the communities from which you come?
Yeah, that's a super important, that's like very core point. I think one of the best commentators about this on Twitter is Yasha Levine, who calls it the weaponized immigrant. And it's kind of ironic, Karthik, that you bring it up with respect to Indians, because isn't there a term called ABCDs, American Born Confused Desi?
Yes.
And there seems to be a consciousness about this from the Indian side of it, right? That the diaspora is in a way confused and lost, maybe easily influenced would be a connotation of confused. And Tammy Duckworth, I think, is an example of this. I know there's plenty of Asian Americans who are uniquely weaponized, and Yasha Levine points a lot of this out. One of the most striking examples of this that I remember personally is at the Democratic National Convention during the Hillary versus Trump campaign, and they had a Pakistani American family come out, and I believe their son had been killed in Iraq, and the father, I'm blanking out on his name.
But this is the father that kind of got into a dust up with Trump.
With Trump, yeah.
Yes.
And so he comes out on stage, and he was a headline event, because at that time Trump was seen as being, he had proposed the ban on Muslim immigration into America until we figure out what's going on with the Muslims, he said.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not defending Trump on this at all, but it was quite a sight to see a man shilling for a woman who supported and was instrumental in starting the war that made him lose his son, and putting that back onto Trump, who had said ugly words for sure, but probably had more credible anti-war history. I'm not saying very credible, but of people,
and that's at least in rhetoric. Yeah,
at least in rhetoric.
At the very least, in rhetoric, he was way more anti-war than Hillary or any other,
Yeah.
And but
the optics of that just didn't catch on. Like, I was trying to point this out on Twitter. I just don't think people saw that irony, because the I don't know. There's just something about, I don't want to call, it's not necessarily identity politics, but the fact that Trump says ugly words, about Muslim people, in a way that offends our sensibilities immediately tilts it so that this just seemed right. It seemed right that he was pointing at Constitution and almost blaming the loss of his son on Trump. When I was like, actually, it's the woman that you're campaigning for who is much more directly responsible. But that was just lost because I think we're much more interested in sort of these domestic racial dynamics of like saying the right things, being racially sensitive and politically correct. So much so that the irony of that was just totally lost on people.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and I think it's too is that it's honestly kind of left with that false dichotomy, right? Where in that instance, that father had to choose between Trump, who's saying shitty things, and a lady who, like, her responsibility is covered up, or even any culpability with Iraq, like. That's kind of even like bringing it out to modern day things where, war crimes have been discussed quite a bit, in regards to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Completely ignored, when it comes to the U.S.'s illegal occupations and wars, when it comes to Iraq, Afghanistan, supplying weapons for Israel, and their apartheid state against Palestinians. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, we give them weapons as well, and like these things are not actually contextualized at all, and so you end up with a grieving father, who ends up for him there's really no good guy there, he the right answer should have been his own press conference talking about how the United States government is full of assholes, but we can't go back.
Yeah,
in a way, like, kind of this brings me back to like even considering the core question of like why people immigrate to the United States. I'm someone who's moved here, and like I kind of ask myself this question, and I don't think that I have a clarifying answer at any point in time, because like it just so happens that like after a while it becomes like you come for one purpose, and then like it kind of becomes part of your life, etc. And then after that, like to divert from your current path, it becomes like a little bit of a challenge. But then the thing is, more crucially, I've seen like, and this is kind of reflected in the immigration system itself and the structure of it, that like you're given asylum here, like you always flee from an area. And also, interestingly, these are all like nations that countries that actually have feel the impact of either direct U.S. occupation or some kind of meddling in the vicinity. If not for which you have to be like you have to buy your way in here. Like you have to like swing your dick and like bring so much money that like they'll give you the green card. One of the things that gets you a green card is like literally cash. Like if you have a certain amount of cash that you're investing, if you buy property or something like that, boom.
I think they call it the investor visa.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if you reflect that, like culturally, if you analyze this, it basically becomes this question of like you either are coming here begging for the United States' help, or you right royally like just like come in swinging with all of this money, and you're like, and now I buy my place here. So and this seems to be the only two kind of trajectories to immigration, like the settler colonialism, if you would like to call it. You're either like you're begging for your place here, or you kind of buy your way in. How does that like reflect in the kind of like status of as you've seen among like especially in the Asian American community and other communities as well? Like how does this reflect in the attitudes, both politically as well as socially?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. It depends on the specifics. I can talk about it broadly, but there are very specific ways this manifests, like the way with Vietnamese refugees after the war. Their political alignment with the United States goes way back and has to do with the prosecution of that war, and so that's one form. But I think generally speaking, like broadly, I mean, I think you're right. I think leaving aside the investor visas for the moment, your ability to buy in as an immigrant, I mean, I think the story of the settler colonialism of America is inverted from the way the ideology tells us immigrants to feel. And I think one way you can look at this is, if you look at if you look at how success is talked about in America, if it's a white guy or a white American, we tend to focus on, like, let's say Elon Musk, who's an immigrant, I understand, but he's white, that we talk about the sort of like values that individual traits that allowed someone like Elon to make it to the top, right? His inventiveness, his grit, his determination, his innovative thinking, and all this stuff. But if it's a non-white immigrant or person, in fact, then we talk about how the system allowed them to succeed, right? And I think one example is the prevalence of South Asian CEOs in Silicon Valley. That is often described as, wow, these people are really taking advantage of our system. Versus like, wait, like, isn't it some insane number of engineers are IIT India Institute of Technology graduates that they've built Silicon Valley, right? Like, we don't like the story really has been from in the settler colonialist perspective that the people here represent the capitalist class that are already here, that are owners, that are landowners, that are capital owners, and they needed to import labor, right? And so who really did all the work was the immigrants and the slaves and all the imported labor that was brought in. But the story that's told is, wow, our system allowed these people to succeed, and thus the chattering classes emerge because we're thankful. We believe the story, and the story is, wow, America allowed me to achieve my dreams, versus, holy shit, I put a lot into building America. America is what it is off of the backs of people like me, and America should be thankful that I'm here, and I didn't even get my fair share. Let's not even talk. Well, let's talk about going back to like reparations. I mean, this is what it goes down to. Where was the equity stake in what they built? Was that ever paid out? No. But I think that's why there's so much power and force behind the weaponized immigrant, the thankful immigrant who's just happy to be here, even though they're toiling away, and their labor is being exploited. Yeah. Right. So they are the backbone of America, and in fact, we do say that. They're the but to appease them and to flatter them. But ultimately, the goal is to develop this personality of being thankful towards America, and not really demanding that, like, wait, I think I'm being underpaid under this H-1B visa.
Yeah, that's right. What you're like what you're describing, it reminds me of this like video I saw like last week, where there's an employee, and I think it was at like a Burger King, some type of like fast food chain, worked there 27 years. And like really like, stated like impeccable record, like not a lot of missed days and all that type of thing. 27 years. And the video was him saying, this is what they got me for 27 years at work, and he had the same job. And he pulls out a lanyard, some lifesavers, and like the old school roll of lifesavers, not even like the new gummy kind. He got 2 pens, like a gift card to Starbucks. And that right there, and like the thing that's like messed up, like I don't blame this guy, but he was happy, he was thankful.
Yeah,
this was like the only extra thing that apparently he had gotten in 27 years. With no realization of like actual how much he's put into that company, and how much not only they owe him, but every single other person that works there.
They owe him a share of profits, is what they own. They owe him part of the franchise.
At this point, they owe him a store. Like, this dude needs it. It's wild. It's wild. But and that's where I think you like to make an extremely good point of just displaying of like in so many ways that this country is like a multiracial like framework that was, as far as how it was built. But then obviously the spoils, right? The actual the benefits and results of all this hard work only goes to the select elite, which is also multiracial. That's kind of like the framing of the like white supremacy alone doesn't actually tell the whole tale, because as we mentioned earlier, you do have that chattering class, and it's for Black people, for Asian people, for Latinos. Like they will do these type of representations in all ways to keep all of the actual workers, in their place. But there's something I did want to bring up too, that you have this with this, like the expectations for these immigrants to kind of like talk down on like where they're coming from and be thankful and all this stuff like that. There's also a constant framing, with certain countries, China to be specific, where no matter what happens, it's always bad. Oh, hey, China shut down a city, because of a COVID scare. They end up, like 2 people died. Like the whole, like how many thousands saved, but at what cost? The supply chain, at what cost? And Karthik put it out recently that even in the case against abortion at the Supreme Court, or like they denying, or overturning Roe, they had stated that, well, places like China and North Korea offer abortion at 12 weeks.
I saw that.
20 weeks. Yeah.
Or 20 weeks. So we really can't do that type of stuff. So I get, like, for one, I get wondering, how does this whole Stop Asian Hate type of thing even resonate when there is that constant barrage of certain countries are always bad, but then also too of like how do you confront that and kind of deal with that in the community?
That's a hard question. The link, I think the link between the rise in anti-Asian violence in America and this tendency to be xenophobic about Asia is certainly connected. The question is, what can we do about it? Frankly, I don't see that. I don't think it's practical to say we need a change in foreign policy thinking because on behalf of Asian Americans. Now, I just say that because I'm being realistic, and I think Asian Americans are going to suffer what we suffer, and I'm not happy about that, and because the brunt of it is usually borne out by the most vulnerable in our society: the women, the elderly, the poor. Right? So they're the ones that suffer the most for this. I think that the reality is there's going to be some, with respect to the diaspora population, really the only answer in America, and it's always been this way, is a measure of self-help. And I think Black radicals realized that in the 60s. Ain't nobody going to help. Nobody gives a shit about anybody here. Okay, it's not just they don't give a shit about Asian people. They don't give a shit about Black people. White people don't give a shit about other white people. Nobody gives a shit about anyone here. It's self-help. Okay, let's face it. So for that, I think there is going to be a measure of community building, interdependence within the community, and I think a measure of, for better or for worse, a measure of suspicion and skepticism about broader coalitional movements that I think mostly lead up the chain to liberal progressive politics that are now sort of have been co-opted and mainstreamed by the Democratic Party. So I think there's going to be a backlash against the Democratic Party. We've seen a backlash against the liberal progressive wing of that in places like San Francisco and the recall of Chesa Boudin and things like that. That will continue. That's going to keep happening. That'll happen here in New York City as well. Okay. As for the, about the demonization of China, I mean, it's annoying. I find it irritating. But I would say that China doesn't really give a shit. China's dealing with the U.S. at a level that goes well beyond what you're saying in the newspapers, and how I think a lot of the annoyance of this comes from, at least by diaspora, comes from a sense that the Western press is being unfair towards China, and therefore unfair towards Chinese people. And my view on that is like, I don't think China really gives a shit about that too much. I mean, to some extent, they don't like, I think with Russia too.
I think that's like a very good point to make is, if you actually pay attention and can understand where China is, as an economic global power. So whatever the Supreme Court justice says, it's exactly right.
They're too busy with their own shit to worry about this,
right? Brush it off. And I guess that's why too of I think that that it is something that like is probably just more bore the brunt of the diaspora, who has to deal with ardent racist or reactionary people who receive this message, literally see anyone with like specific characteristics and then go some type of verbal or physical assault.
I think the consequences of this this need to demonize countries that are not supplicant to the U.S. international rules-based order, or whatever you want to call it, Russia, China, Iran. I think particularly with China, because they call them a near peer competitor or whatever. They're kind of kicking our ass in a lot of ways, in ways that we care about, right? Like in industry and stuff. We're starting to come around in America. I think we're starting to come around to the idea that we're in a state of denial and it's not leading to anywhere good. And I actually have seen a turnaround in the media lately. Today, I think there was an op-ed by a person, I don't know what her job is or whatever, but she lives in the Solomon Islands, and said, can you really blame us for turning towards China? Let's look at the record of the US and Australia when it comes to us. And the New York Times printed this. And I've seen more and more a real inflection point now where the media is starting to pick up on the notion like, wait, we can't just keep lying to ourselves, right? Like we actually have to compete now because like reality is against us and we can lie to ourselves, but we're just going to keep losing. And I think that's happening in Latin America. I think that's, Latin America is probably the biggest geopolitical story that's getting virtually zero attention. I think maybe the Colombian election finally woke some people up and are like, whoa, this is a string of fucking victories for the, for left president.
AMLO, the Mexican president, like he's been going at the U.S. hegemony. I mean, more than I've been seen any other central or southern South American countries leadership do. And it's like, I love it. I'm here for it, and I agree with you. This is the biggest thing that's happening on the world stage right now is the South American push to the left, and and Mexico really having their back. It's kind of amazing to see. And the thing is too is a lot of it is based out of support from China and Russia over decades now.
I mean, there was a really interesting thing that I read from Chomsky where he said Latin America tends to be a lot more democratic than the U.S. in the sense that the candidates are actually very far apart between the left and the right, and you have a much wider range of politicians. And so the U.S. always has a favored one, obviously, and said, short of doing a coup, if the wrong person wins, short of killing this person, what they'll do is something called a capital strike, which is the immediate removal of American investment capital if the wrong person wins. So you start pinning economic decline and underperformance to the left, to the sort of socialist nationalist type candidate. Every time that guy wins or that woman wins, everything goes to shit because of the U.S. capital strike. And it seems now that if there's other sources of capital, from Asia, that dynamic kind of breaks. You can no longer just unilaterally punish the election outcome by saying, okay, we're just going to withhold investment, because now you're just ceding market share to the Chinese, and so that's why you've got Argentina, the Argentinian president going over to China and stuff and saying, what I'm saying is I don't think that they ever felt supplicant to the United States. They just felt like they had no other choice. So I don't think it's necessarily a wake up in consciousness. I think it's just market conditions have changed. We don't have to listen to the Yankees anymore.
Right.
We're getting better term sheets from across the Pacific. Fuck you guys, so.
Yeah. And it's it's kind of, I think one of the things that you're pointing out with the change in the even in the media sentiment that they're actually acknowledging this reality now, or at least beginning to. We don't know if they actually are gonna stick with this, because as you can see, especially with the Asian chattering class, and this is what's happening. A lot of these articles that are decrying, China's debt trap diplomacy, etc., are largely written by, or at least they are tried to be, assigned to more Asian American voices. And so like when someone says when someone says like, this is what's happening in China. And I mean, like I kind of heard that even when they BBC interviewed Deborah Brottingham, who's like the person who actually clarifies the myth of this death trap, and actually it's fake. The BBC misquotes her and actually makes her when she explains the concept, they kind of make it seem as if she's actually agreeing with them, but she's actually not. She's explaining the concept to say that she's not agreeing with this characterization that China is actually trapping people in debt. So given that, I think like this is kind of what is becoming like a more you pointed it out correctly, that it's like more of an inter-community kind of clash, where there is a group of liberal Asian Americans who are totally fine with upholding the status quo narrative on China, on like the US policy, and like for some reason feel incentivized to do so. In fact, like feel completely vindicated in doing that, and like and they also reflect a certain kind of class priorities, and a certain kind of even community priorities. Like maybe they in India, in the case of Indian Americans, I can say that like they also come from a certain kind of caste priorities, because that kind of classification exists in Indian society. I'm not too familiar in other Asian American societies, and like you could speak to that. But like, how do we have this when we have this kind of intra-community clash of both class priorities and priorities among other divisions, that kind of manifests as an outlook towards whether it be China, whether it be India, or whether it be any other country. It feels like it's being hashed out in the United States. It's almost like the narrative needs to get like you're fighting to make sure this narrative gets out, or like that there is a counter narrative. Of course, like the way that we go about it is like to have independent podcasts like your own, and like others that kind of try to, okay, hang on, this is not the picture. You're not getting the full picture from these people. They're lying to you, or they're fabricating it so much, which seems like, I think, to come to a sort of clash, come to a head between these two points. And this is, I think, like my question, which is either your it kind of brilliantly represented in popular culture itself, like how there are a group of Asians, Asian Americans, Indian Americans, etc., South Asian Americans, East Asian Americans, who want more representation in that, the white supremacist like interpretation of culture, or whatever, or capital centric interpretation of culture, like American capital centric interpretation of culture, versus the group of people who are daring to defy it in many forms. And I think like there's a component of it that is trying to be more disciplined on as like principled as like leftists or socialists, and then there is also a faction like the Wesley Yang, Kim Iverson types, who are like kind of being more comfortable with being more reactionary, libertarian, etc. So it's kind of like an interesting like assortment of perspectives that are kind of having it out over here. So I guess my question is like, how do we navigate this space, and like how do you actually play up the voices that are actually trying to, I mean, I guess like to represent reality in a meaningful way?
I think my starting point to that question, which is a very tough question, is that I don't think any of this stuff ultimately adds up to much anyway. Meaning the chattering classes are engaged in discourse that's really meant, in my opinion, to be a distraction. And I think of the analogy of like a bullfighter, where the discourse is the red flag that's meant to take the bona fide anger and motivation and energy of the people and misdirect it at things like media representation, misdirected at, I think a lot of these chattering, they're meant, their goal, in my opinion, like, and I saw this happen in the New York Times, for example, not only do they put a lot of East Asian names, and like conspicuously Chinese names, where they don't have, like, say, given a Christian first name or whatever, on the byline of any article that's like hawkish against China, to sort of like wash the, you could take it at a literal sense, but I think in another sense, there's a consciousness of saying, well, we are going to piss people off specifically. We're trolling people with this. We want you to get angry. We want you to fight about this. And I noticed that a lot of them are women. And so when they get attacked, I think, and I saw this happen at the New York Times, to say, wow, there's this concerted effort to attack women, whatever. And to me, it's all, the more, I think in a way, it's like the bull going after the red flag. It's like the more you're pursuing this discourse, the more you're falling into the trap of what they really want, which is distraction, subterfuge, misdirection, and so for me personally, I don't think the quote discourse is particularly relevant one way or another. I think the whole thing is a bit of a head fake, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm necessarily describe myself as a leftist or even particularly political in action. I do think that the thing that people fear, those in power do fear, is consciousness, is people thinking for themselves and pursuing their own interests, because you need people to work against their own interests, and you need to have people who are thankful for being underpaid and stuff. In China, as an example, and here's a proof that I'm not a Chinese nationalist or very pro, whatever. There is an online movement called Kangping, which literally means to lay flat, and it's kind of a beautiful little thing. It's like, it was a reaction against the sort of like overwork and ultra competitiveness of the educational system, the ultra competition to get into high tech sector and make a lot of money. A lot of young people felt like it was hopeless for them and that it was too competitive and they had no shot at it. And they said, look, I'm going to lay flat, because if I lay flat, the shears of capitalism can't cut me off, right? So it's like, I'm not even going to grow. And I think, a widespread consciousness of being like, man, this game is rigged against us, I'm not going to participate. That happened in America. And I think that things that were really threatening to America were not actually organized political movements that were going after, because I think those are very easily distracted and head faked, that we saw with BLM, that we saw with Occupy. I mean, once you get organized, it's easy to co-opt the leadership. Once it has structure, you can co-opt it, and then it's over. I think what's really threatening, and we've seen this in the U.S., is just a mass tendency for people to decline to participate in the labor market at all. This is really fucking the system up. This is throwing real sand into the gears of American capitalism. It's not an organized effort. It's the total lack of organization of saying, I'm not going to participate. I give up. And that's what I think they really fear more than some organized revolution, is my personal take. Like, a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I just think it's an underexplored aspect of this, which is what happens when people just don't have motivation to continue on anymore. You got to give people at least a reason to get up if you're going to if you're going to exploit them, right? You got to at least they got to get themselves out of bed.
Yeah.
So.
This also happens to be the theme of Beyonce's new song, like the Great Resignation and stuff like that, right? Which is kind of the whole like quit your job kind of thing. I mean, there is a certain level of, I feel, you were right to kind of point out that like there is a certain level of privilege, or like at least a notion of like, if you would have to take some cut, you can't like afford to, you will lose some money over this, or like you will lose some power position, status, etc. And I think that like especially in the present, like it's hard to imagine that being like a point of a catalyst for anything, because there's already like with the inflation stuff, and like we're definitely headed into, if not already in, a recession, and so on. Like, so there's like a pretty sizable sense of like despair, where a lot of people, I feel like, and in fact some of the decisions that you pointed out, there's a lot of like, I mean, with this data point that like people are divesting from the Democratic Party, that doesn't mean that they're like staying back home, or like that even sometimes means that they're voting for Republicans. What good that does, I have no idea. But like that seems to be some kind of like, people want to do something, like, as opposed to there is energy to do something. So to get people to like not do something at this point, I feel like I don't even know if there would be a possibility for that, because they need to make the money that they need to make. I feel like people are more willing to take bigger risks than before, right? Like than ever now.
Well, I would say that it is happening, and I think that's why there is a labor shortage And I think it ties into what we started this conversation on with too. There's also been a real cutoff in the immigration pipeline into the United States. So I think if left to our own devices in the way that we've sort of oppressed workers and suppressed their wages and really just treat workers like shit, the only way to any system is going to collapse if you do it so much that the laborers just say, "Fuck it, I'm not coming to work." The game is so rigged. Why would I even play? Now, if nobody plays, the whole system falls apart. And we know this through the concept of, like, say, a general strike. We know, right? Like, this will kill the system. But the thing is, I think in America, you can always kind of avoid that by bringing in new, fresh, imported labor, right? The immigrants is where the source of motivation is. One, they've been fed lies about the United States, right? They come in with, I think most immigrants see the reality of America and realize it doesn't quite measure up to what they were told about it, right?
Sold a bill of goods,
right?
Yeah.
So I think that the U.S. relies on that sort of like fresh replenishment of forces, right? And the new immigrants come in and they put competitive pressure on existing labor here, and it keeps the game alive. And now I don't think it's any coincidence that we're seeing a general loss of labor participation, the rise of wage inflation. They call it wage inflation, but it's just increasing wages, which is apparently a disaster for America to raise wages. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that's happening at the same time that the immigration pipeline has basically shut down, which is not in the news. But that is the case.
Which,
right?
And that's something that I think very important to touch on, is that it's not even necessarily true, and I think that it is the notion that there is a caravan of workers coming across the southern border, every 10 minutes, it seems like now, because they need to keep up that narrative, like they're coming right now, and it's always based off of these economic fears of you're going to lose your job, and I think actually this overlaps with technology as well, as like a concerted effort as a way to like keep like the labor force in fear of, oh, if you just make us raise your wages, like we're just going to bring in machines, which is impossible. Like the AI, that threat of complete automation, it's just a fucking it's a lie. Yeah. So that's so that's where that type of consciousness and understanding would really that really kind of hurts the elites, the people in charge, that need, and they like just absolutely literally rely on that exploitation in order to keep these things going. So
and I think that shows you that there are two sides to immigration, right? I think the Democrats and the liberals have treated immigration itself as a sort of mercy program granted upon the world. Like immigration is something that we have blessed the world with, the ability to come and be with us, but really that's a pretty story that's wrapped around a real need in this country to replenish the exploitable labor population, because we use up our labor and then we just throw it out. And you see that all over America. You see just broken people with just no options, with nowhere to go. We've just discarded them, and we need to bring new people in, right? So that process is so, I think, unsustainable that it ultimately just collapses itself. And it's almost like you don't need to organize against it. You need to just not participate in it, starve it rather than topple it. I don't think it can be toppled. It's too heavily armed. It's too rich. It's not, you don't go full frontal attack. I think it's got to collapse from the inside of its own weight. And you're seeing it. It's happening. It's already happening for us.
I think there's also things that need to be incorporated, and especially since especially from United States, a person like that, looking, outward, is that, the likelihood that some internal organization is going to be able to gain power within the United States, control, and then like basically, give control to like people so that they can create societies. It's more likely that some of the things that we talked about, where China, along with pretty much like very like certain sections across the world, building an alternate like an ultimate economic world for a lot of the other countries, and then letting the United States collapse onto itself, which
it will force people. I mean, we're in such a mess now. I think that I think we're actually going to start seeing significant changes in the way policymakers talk about stuff, because they're like, when you're just fucking with people's conceptions and ideas and distracting them or lying to them or whatever, you're just playing a parlor game. It's just like, hey, we can do whatever the fuck we want. And then it's just like, what kind of lies should we tell them today? I don't know. Yeah. And then it's a cocktail battle of whose lie to tell. But when you're confronted with actual reality, and the CPI prints 8.7%, and the GDP is going to be down for a second quarter in a row, and you're seeing interest rates go up, and you're seeing a recession, and your businesses are getting fucked up, and the money stops flowing, then it's not a cocktail game anymore, and these people got to get real. Their bottom line's getting hurt now too. So, I think the problem with America is that we've been in a 40-year economic bubble, and it has allowed those in power to basically do whatever the fuck they want, right? Because they can just print money, right? So you want to just throw your workers away and bring in new ones? Okay, you can do it. If you want to do, whatever the fuck
shut the factory down, ship it over to
whatever. It doesn't fucking matter. You could do whatever you want. But now, when the economic realities of this whole thing start to splinter through the floor, and it's making the people the people in power very, very anxious. They're gonna have to start being fucking more responsible about things, or they're going to see the whole system crash before their very eyes. So I think in a way, it's the best of times and the worst of times. And, they're always talking in the newspapers about how the people who are going to hurt, the liberals love to say this, the people who are going to hurt the most are the bottom, the poor, the poor and the working class. Well, yeah, but you know what? We also have the least to lose. Really? Right? So if you think about it in that term, it's like, well, why are they telling us? Why are they telling us that we have to vote? Why are they telling us that we have to organize? Why are they telling us that we're the most susceptible? It's going to hurt us the most. We're the ones with the most to lose. Inflation hurts us the most. I'm like, you know what? A lot of people don't have much to lose. So how much can it really hurt? Because they've already been acclimated to the pain, right? So I think the people who are in fear the most are the people with the most to lose. So fuck them. Okay, well, you have to sort your own shit out. I don't know. So, I'm just taking a different approach here.
I think it's pretty poignant.
I'd like to, if anything, see it through to its conclusion, right? Like you're putting a kernel, you're taking a kernel of an idea, and I can really appreciate that. Like I think basically especially if you invoke the Black radicals, Black Panthers, especially, and like where are you based? Are you in California or like in
New York?
You're in New York. Okay, so yeah. I mean, I thought that you were in LA or Oakland for a second.
I like LA and Oakland, but yeah, New York City.
Yeah. So if you are invoking the Black Panthers, then you're not just looking at self-help from the point of view of like apathy or like just a rebellion. You're kind of like taking care of our own kind of attitude that you're bringing into the picture. And like especially, and you were right to point out that like the extent to which like the Democratic Party losses for certain, in certain areas, like you even pointed out the Chesapeake recall and stuff like that, which did have and does have like a significant like Asian American component to it, and stuff like that. And there are like certain, like even the concept of there's no rules, and that's kind of how America operates. I would argue that like there's a strain of the U.S. The Democratic Socialist platform itself that does like have this, tries to weaponize this as a way of like as a way of moving towards a more egalitarian society. And I think like it's reasonable in a way where it's like, if you can afford to do this, you can afford to give people healthcare and stuff like that. So it's like, if you can afford to do blah blah blah, you can actually set up a Green New Deal and stuff like that. And a lot of it actually does derive from this point that like you can print money here, you can actually like, the Fed can actually do this kind of shit. Like the only thing is you got to tie it to the back of a federal job guarantee and stuff like that. So that's the program I've seen, at least from a democratic socialist standpoint. So clearly you're pointing to something that is not exactly in line with that, or like maybe you support views that are like that, but like at the same time you are also pointing out a kind of self-help where the community is able to take care of itself. So what is that going to look like is something that I think immediately becomes the question.
Well, I think self-help is very limited in terms of like personal safety, things like that. In terms of economic activity, we need a national economy, we need a global economy. I think unless we're prepared to really regress in terms of our living standard, and I don't think people want to do that. So I think that when I talk about self-help communities, I'm not talking in terms of an economic sense. I mean, we're all going to be bound to a national economy one way or another. I think is the reality of that. I think with the Dem Socs, you're right. I think they have interesting they have an interesting view of economics. I think informed by MMT. Federal Jobs Guarantee is an MMT, Stephanie Kelton type of idea. It makes sense, but I think the problem is that it came to prominence at a time when inflation is going through the roof. And so that was their own self-determined limit as to how much Fed printing we can do. We're already obviously then way past the limit by their own definition. So the timing on the MMT economics that the Dem Socs favor is not really well timed. What the future holds here, I think, is just indeterminate. I mean, I think we're at a point where it's just like nobody knows. I mean, if America was like a TV series, like the best season ever, we have no idea what's coming next. We have no idea. Nobody has a very good theory, but we know something big is about to happen, or it's already happening. And so I don't know. I think that I'm just trying to inject a little bit of optimism here, but through the back door to say like, I think the capitalists are really fucking scared right now. And for workers who have endured, 40, 50 years of wage stagnation, it's hard to really get them riled up about what I think a lot of people are sitting back waiting what's going to happen, because it's like, what do they have to lose? If you look at Americans, I'm like, so many American families are so fucking straddled with debt. They're kind of like, I don't know, like either you just clear the debts and we have a debt jubilee and let's just fucking start over and let's just equalize and I don't know, do something big. That would be a revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, that's increasingly looking like the fact that we're flirting with stuff like just straight up debt forgiveness is nothing I've ever seen in this country before. That flies in the face of some of the most deeply held ideological beliefs in America, which is that you pay your debts. The fact that we're even talking at a mainstream level about forgiving debts shows the depth of what we're dealing with here. So it's pretty.
And I think that like where, and something that you'd hit on earlier of like, well, like, hey, like this is the big season, is because like having to discuss those things shows right of where this country is shifting, but only in a sense rhetorically, which makes that upcoming thing, it's going to be even more, I guess, it's like there's going to be more friction built up because, like you said, right? Black Lives Matter, Me Too, like pushing for student loan debt, pushing for more climate change, literally any of the things that have gotten people motivated to, do some sort of public, quote unquote political action hasn't really come to, like there's no results that are coming to fruition. And that's building the more tension, so that like, who knows, right? Like what series of events that are going to come, close together that really start having people say, I'm just going to lie down. Yeah, I'm not engaging with this anymore.
That's totally it. I'm going to lie down, but I'm going to pay attention, right? Like,
yes.
I think I'm watching. to see what's going on, because I don't think there's shit all anybody can do about what's going on. I think the big story is that we've lost control. I think the authorities have lost control. The Fed has lost control of the economy. The government's lost control of the economy. It's lost control of the foreign policy situation. It's lost control of Latin America. It's lost control of China, of Eastern Europe, of NATO. It's lost control. Okay, they can't dictate. They can't go around just telling people what is going to happen anymore. They've been exposed, and it's fucking scary for them. But they're trying to make us participate in their fear. They're trying to make it seem as if like we're the ones that are going to get hurt by their loss of omnipotence. And I'm like, no, I'm just watching, man.
Yeah,
I'm just sitting here watching. But eventually, you have to do something for us, because you're going to lose control of us too. You know, and that's the final straw, right?
The James Franco meme where he's, you know, like they're at the they're all about to hang. Yeah, like, oh yeah, first time.
That's why I don't want to participate in their fear. Their fear is that their companies go bankrupt. Their fear is that the economy gets fucked. Their fear is that you know, there's all the pillars of their empire are starting to fall, and they're just recruiting us to their side through fear.
Yeah.
And I'm like, for people who have suffered 40 years of stagnation or going backwards or whatever, I don't think they're really going to sign up to help you this time.
Yeah.
I don't think they're particularly feared. And that's why when you watch the news and stuff, I think mostly it's preaching to the choir. I think it's preaching to the professional middle classes, which is a small minority of people. They're the lieutenant class. They're hitched to this thing. You know, they're over-levered. Their kids are in private school. They're fucked, right? But for like the vast majority of Americans are sitting by going, shit,
I got nothing to lose.
I wouldn't want to be you, you know?
Which at that point, like I do call it there, but and I think a good point to leave it on, and honestly too, I think this is like maybe the first time that I've actually like heard someone kind of like articulate this description of the popular narrative that's kind of going on. It's like, don't let them suck you into their fear. It's like, because, hey, like, we have nothing to fear, right? We've got nothing to lose. But especially now, right? Especially now, where Roe's gone, you know, they're about to, like, take away the EPA, so any chance of, like, type of climate, you know, stuff like that. Some of the most important things for people in general, but especially the next generation that's coming up, are it's all gone.
Yeah,
you have nothing left to lose.
Yeah, bro, the 10-year treasury market ain't my problem. It's your problem.
It's your problem.
I'm not gonna be worried about the 10-year bond. I don't own any.
But thank you so much, Teen, for coming on. And if you would please, you know, let people know where they can find you. If you have anything big coming up, or just kind of grinding day to day, like let people know where they can find you at.
Easiest way to find us, just, you know, subscribe to our podcast. Any way you in any method as to how you subscribe to your favorite podcast. The title is called Escape from Plan A. Escape from Plan A. There you go.
Cool. And Karthik, thanks for hanging out. Always good to see you. And once again, it was very nice seeing you in real life. And we're gonna have to do this again sometime. You know, there'll just have to be more media companies opening up and doing launches in Brooklyn.
Nice. Yeah, and I'll get a little less shit faced. I think that's something that I'm gonna carry forward.
Which is all good. All right. So let's see here. I don't even know. I'm actually gonna boot y'all, and then transition over to just the normal stream type of stuff. But thanks again. And we
it was fun, guys.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Peace.
Catch you next time.